wrongfully convicted, and whose literary gifts, which transformed him from underachieving blue-collar worker to curious intellectual, made him worth saving. As Buckley came to regard Smith as a genuine friend, he also operated out of loyalty. As the lawyer and former National Review correspondent Donald G.M. Cox told me, "We were taken in, I suspect, in part by our unwillingness to believe that anyone who loved N.R. could be a savage killer." Even after it was clear that his faith in Edgar was severely misguided, Buckley concluded, Edgar Smith has done enough damage in his lifetime without underwriting the doctrine that the verdict of a court is infallible. That unshakable belief exonerated a psychopath, elevating Smith to prominence and some power at the expense of the women he harmed, injured, and murdered. Buckley fell into the trap described in Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. An honest and sensitive man opens his heart, and the man of business listens and goes on eating. And then he eats you up. In March 1957, Edgar Smith seemed like a typical young man living in New Jersey's Bergen County, married, the father of a newborn baby, a veteran of the Marines, discharged because of partial deafness in his left ear, in between jobs. Victoria Zielinski, 15 years old at the time, was murdered in the small town of Mahwah, her head bashed in by a baseball bat and a couple of large rocks. It didn't take long for authorities to find and arrest Smith. Zielinski's blood was on a pair of his pants and in the car he'd borrowed that day. He also admitted to the police that he had given her a ride, though he claimed that she was still alive when they had parted. The trial lasted 2 weeks and was a standing-room-only sensation. Mary Higgins Clark, years before writing the novels that immortalized her as the Queen of Suspense, attended every day and dated the beginning of her career as a crime writer to the case. Smith testified in his own defense, and the resulting inconsistencies were noticed even by trial attendees as young as 10 years old. It took less than 2 hours for the jury to convict him and the judge to sentence him to death. Smith kept appealing his execution and avoiding the electric chair, and since he was staying alive, he decided to better himself, enrolling in college classes, reading history books, and keeping up with current affairs through magazines. Fate played a hand when William F. Buckley learned of a 1962 newspaper story about Smith in which the convict praised National Review as one of his favorite periodicals. Buckley and the National Review's intellectual stock were rising among conservatives, but he had only just begun to write his syndicated newspaper column, On the Right, and he was still several years away from his quixotic run for New York City mayor and the first broadcast of his interview show, Firing Line. Buckley would later learn that Smith's access to National Review had been cut off after the prison official who lent him copies had been transferred away from the death house. Sensing a story, feeling some pang of sympathy, or both, Buckley wrote Smith to ensure the prisoner would always receive a copy of National Review. Over the next 9 years, through an exchange of more than 1,500 pages of correspondence, the two men became friends, and Buckley became convinced that Smith was not Zielinski's killer. Buckley wrote about the case, and his belief in Edgar Smith's innocence, in several columns and in a 1965 story for Esquire. He used the fee he earned for the story to seed the Death House Inmates Defense Fund. Smith had been acting as his own jailhouse lawyer. Now Buckley found Smith several lawyers to work on his appeals. Buckley also set Smith up with Sophie Wilkins, a dynamic and vivacious editor at the New York-based book publishing firm Alfred A. Knopf. She worked closely with Smith on his 1968 book, Brief Against Death, which argued that the state of New Jersey's case against him was riddled with holes, and attempted, above all, to persuade the reader that he had not killed Vicky Zielinski. Wilkins, as I discovered while working in her archives at Columbia University, became more than Smith's editor. Their correspondence, which she preserved nearly in full, began in strictly professional fashion, with her recommending books to read and offering encouragement on the manuscript that became Brief Against Death. Then it devolved into something more. They exchanged declarations of love, gifts and artwork, and mutual pornographic fantasies, his smuggled out through third parties to avoid the prying eyes of the death house censors. He called her Red, she called him Ilya. Their fights about editorial changes quickly spiraled out of control.